I'm there for you, babe. Love it.
They're very supportive.
They are.
All right. Who is the greatest babysitter mentioned in the Bible?
Is this a joke?
Yes.
Okay. Because then I have to put the right, like, are we thinking versus yeah.
Solomon threatened to cut babies in half.
Oh.
So maybe not him.
Yeah, definitely not Saul.
Samuel?
Maybe.
He did a terrible job.
Eli? You gotta think about play on words, you know?
Oh, the Pharaoh's daughter.
Yeah, but that would be like, she was like a legit good babysitter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jesus is always the answer.
Yeah.
Did anybody like sit on a baby? Or,
How about if you rocked a baby? A big baby? Okay. David, because he rocked Goliath to a very deep sleep.
Oh gosh. We just read a lot about David's interaction with his own children. And I'm not.
The greatest babysitter, not necessarily father.
Great babysitter, terrible
Better.
father. Hopefully don't turn out that way.
All right, so let's see. Do I have control? Okay. Well, last time we were talking about basically Jesus leading up to his crucifixion. And so we had started in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he stopped to pray and was eventually arrested. And then that took us to the high priest Caiaphas' house, where, kind of controversial trial, whether it was actually legal proceedings, definitely was not ethical proceedings, in how he was basically, brought forth to the Jewish leaders and didn't really have any witnesses to protect him. Basically was just a witch hunt, or a Jesus hunt in his case. And then we talked about the courtyard where Peter denied knowing Jesus 3 times, which we'll come back to that later on. But yeah, this was the courtyard, and then the underground caves that were in close proximity to the house, where this is thought to be a public jail where they kept prisoners. And there's some thought that Jesus was probably kept in a pit, within the jail there, referencing back to Jeremiah, where he was also kept in a similar pit for causing ruckus, when the Babylonians were coming to take over.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Was he the same guy that the Babylonians took his eyes out after the Babylonians killed everybody of his family?
No, that was the king. King Zedekiah. Or, yeah, because he tried to escape through the Valley of Death, and he was eventually caught up with, and then, his sons were killed in front of him, and then he was blinded. Yeah. Great things. And then we just started talking about the Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering, or sorrowful way. And so there's a traditional way of the cross where it is thought that Jesus, this is a procession leading up to Golgotha or Calvary. And so the Catholic Church basically recognizes 14 stations leading up to his death and then being laid in the tomb. Yeah, so we're going to talk about that today. So yeah, we're gonna actually follow.
Scooby-Doo, everybody knows that.
So we're gonna make our way through Jerusalem, leading basically to Golgotha here. And so the first station is Jesus is condemned to death. And so if I can have two readers, we're going to be reading out of John. So we'll do 28 through 40 and then 19, 1 through 16.
John 18.
John 18, 28 through 40.
They led Jesus from Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. By now it was early morning. They did not enter the headquarters building because they didn't want to become ritually defiled and thus unable to eat the Passover meal. So Pilate went outside to them and said, "What charge are you bringing against this man?" They answered, "If he hadn't done something wrong, we wouldn't have brought him to you. Pilate said to them, "You take him and judge him according to your own law." The Judeans replied, "We don't have the legal power to put anyone to death." This was so that what Jesus had said about how he was going to die might be fulfilled. So Pilate went back to the headquarters, called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Are you asking this on your own, or have other people told you about me?" Pilate replied, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and head priest have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingship does not derive its authority from this world's order of things. If it did, my men would have fought to keep me from being arrested by the Judeans. But my kingship does not come from here." "So then," Pilate said to him, "you're a king after all." Jesus answered, "You say I'm a king. The reason I have been born, the reason I have come into the world, is to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to me." Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" Having said this, Pilate went outside again to the Judeans and told them, "I don't find any case against him. However, you have a custom that at Passover I set one prisoner free. Do you want me to set free for you the king of the Jews?" But they yelled back, "No, not this man, but Barabbas."
Okay, great. And then a second reader. 19, 1. Okay.
So Pilate then took Jesus and had him flogged, and the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and placed it on his head and put a purple cloak on him. And they repeatedly came up to him and said, "Hail, King of the Jews," and slapped him in the face again and again. And then Pilate came out again and said to them, "See, I am bringing him out to you so that you will know that I find no grounds at all for the charges in his case." Jesus then came out wearing a crown of thorns and a purple robe. And Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." So when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they shouted, saying, "Crucify, crucify." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no grounds for charges in his case." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself out to be the Son of God." Therefore, when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid, and he entered the praetorium again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "Are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you, and I have authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all if I had not been given to you from above. For this reason, the one who handed me over to you has authority to sin." As a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him, but the Jews shouted, saying, "If you release this man, you are not a friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar." Therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in the Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of the preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour, and they said to the Jews, "Look, your king." So they shouted, "Away with him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king except Caesar." So he then handed him over to them to be crucified. They took Jesus, therefore, and he went out carrying his own cross to the place called Place of a Skull, which in
Yeah, that's okay.
About 19, sorry.
We'll get there. Okay. So I was reading this again last night, and when we had that conversation regarding timelines and calendars, and this once again, John is just a little different than some of the other Gospels, and because he specifically says that it was preparation day for the Passover, and it was about noon. So, where does that really kind of fit in the timeline with this? Who knows exactly, but it'd be an interesting study. I might even do that at some point, to go back and try to piece this together.
I gave you what I came up with. You can take it from there.
Yeah, that'd be great.
There's a couple of pretty long and decent narratives on why it was the Passover.
Yeah, it's just interesting to think about. I mean, obviously, it really doesn't make one difference, because the point is these are stories, and we know that in the end, Jesus did die, and he was resurrected, and we believe that he's going to come again. So now, going back to the passage today, governor's headquarters. Julie also mentioned the praetorium. Who had the praetorium in their version? Who had the? Yeah. I think I have the Christian Standard Bible here. So mine was the governor's headquarters. But the praetorium is a Latin term for general's tent within a Roman encampment. And so there actually is some thought as to where this took place. And there's two likely places. The first is you have the Antonia Fortress, which is up here right next to the Temple Mount. And then the other likely place is over here, which is Herod's Palace. Now, the Antonia Fortress, that was a Roman military barracks, and this is where tradition actually places the trial. But it's interesting because recent archaeological uncoverings actually give more favor to Herod's Palace as the actual location where Pilate had been staying himself and likely had sentenced him to death. Mark, the Gospel of Mark even mentions that Jesus was led to the palace or the headquarters afterwards, which we're going to get to that in just a bit. That's Mark 15. So this is a picture of the citadel, the Tower of David, which is adjacent to Herod's palace. And then Antonia Fortress, yeah, that's up here.
Where is it again in relation to Herod's Palace?
The citadel?
Yeah.
So it's actually, this is kind of one large building.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, Herod, in the time of Herod, he built 3 towers at the, yes.
So it makes sense that the Praetorian Guard would have guarded both King Herod and Pontius Pilate, the governor. So it makes sense for them to be in the same administrative building and to have the same quarters.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I would just say, based on that alone, I would think you look toward the palace.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly why they thought Antonia Fortress. I mean, it is a barracks, likely where they kept a lot of, the military, because they wanted actually a military presence next to the temple, especially in, when you have these large gatherings, just to kind of keep the peace. But as why Pilate would be up here rather than out here, Pilate is, he's the main honcho, and right, and he would have wanted to just stay in a place of luxury. Why go to work down the street if you can just work out of your home? But Herod, he built 3 towers at the northwest corner of Western Hill to not only defend the city, but also safeguard his palace. And so this area here, the three towers, that was named the Citadel. Although later it was coined the Tower of David, as when the Byzantines came to the area, they mistakenly associated Herod's palace to King David, and then they named it the Tower of David, and the name just stuck after that. So it really had nothing to do with David. But that's what they call it, the Tower of David. Herod named the tallest of the towers Phasael, in memory of his brother who had committed suicide while in captivity. Another tower was called Marianum, which is named after his second wife, who he had executed and buried in a cave to the west of the tower. And then the third tower was Hippicus, which was named after one of his friends. And so of the three towers, only the base of one of them survived, and it's likely either Phasael or the Hippicus Tower. They're not really sure. Yeah. But yeah, so with our tours, we were following the traditional path that was set forth by the Roman Catholic Church. We actually didn't go into the Citadel, but I heard it's really nice in there, very luxurious. Okay, next, Jesus is given his cross. So we're going to go to Mark 15. It's 16 through 20. Oh, actually, while you guys are getting that ready, I'm going to go grab something real quick. Okay, somebody have it ready?
Now the soldiers took him away into the palace, that is the Praetorium, and they called together the whole Roman cohort, and they dressed him in purple, and after twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on him. And they began saluting, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they repeatedly beat his head with a reed and spit on him. And kneeling, they bowed down before him. And after they had mocked him, they took the purple cloak off him and put his own garments on him, and they led him out to crucify him.
All right, thank you. All right, so Ziaphus Spina Christi. That's this tree here, and I apologize. Yeah, doesn't really come out very clearly. But this is known as Christ's Thorn Jubilee. This is an evergreen tree, which is native to East Africa, and it's thought to have spread to this area through the migration of birds. It's a very resilient plant, able to withstand high temperatures and dryness, which is one of the very few species that can actually survive on the barren slopes around Jerusalem, because it's more of a desert climate. This picture actually was taken from the Mount of Olives. So this actually was just a random tree. But you can see, this is a close-up here. There's some pretty large spines. And I found this out in the hallway. I don't know where this came from. But, this is supposed to represent some of the spines. I don't know if this, because the ones I saw on the tree were much bigger than this. What does this say? Thorn bushes grow abundantly in the Jerusalem environs. The monks of St. Catherine Monastery in Sinai are pointing out a thorn bush growing east of the large monastery wall. This crown of thorns has been sanctified in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So there's a couple different types of plants that are available.
I have no idea where it came from.
Who's to say, it sounds like this came from a bush. This is a tree. They actually were several inches long. So they were, yeah. They're pretty large. Are they heavier? Than this?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I didn't actually touch the spines. I figured, it's fine.
I wonder what would happen if you did.
Yes, Jim.
So, why is his scourging not a station? The scourging should have killed him. It is so brutal. Anything that we just read pales in comparison to scourging.
They came up with the stations back in the Crusader time.
I just think it's really important to understand that if he was not really healthy and a physical guy, it would have killed him. He would have never made it to the cross.
Yeah, that's true.
He probably is having a hard time standing up at this point. These guys are just humiliating.
Yeah.
I wonder why that wasn't made a big
Station.
deal, yeah.
Well, these are just titles. I mean, it's meant to, I'm sure a lot of it goes together. But that's why, at least for me, when I was visiting the Garden of Gethsemane, just sitting there knowing, that Jesus also sat in this area and knew that this is what was going to happen to him. I mean, how much strength that would have taken. That was, for me, that was something very personal. But yeah, so this particular tree, it has edible fruits and a number of beneficial uses. It's a very heavy, durable wood used in construction and furniture making, and its fruits, leaves, root, and bark are all used in medicine. And so some people have actually mentioned that this particular species of tree is actually a good metaphor for Jesus himself. He himself was very strong, resilient to the scorn of the Jewish leaders. The wood for construction as a carpenter, the medicinal uses of the fruits, leaves, root, and bark, as he himself was a healer.
Thorny too.
So yeah, just, one of those things that's kind of interesting. All right. Now from here, now we're starting to kind of deviate a bit from actual scripture. And so I'm not sure, where tradition comes from with these. But the third station, Jesus falls. Yeah, just case in point, I mean, how much strength they would have had to, withstand the beatings, the crown of thorns, the heavy cross, so he falls for the first time. Supposedly he meets his mother along the way, which we'll see him later actually talking to his mother. But yeah, supposedly he meets his mother for the first time along the route. And then the next one, Simon of Cyrene carries the cross. So that one we can read. Somebody still have Mark open?
Yeah.
Which is one verse, 20.
When they had finished ridiculing him, they took off his purple robe, put his own clothes back on him, and led him away to be nailed to the execution stake.
Oh, I'm sorry, 21.
A certain man from Cyrene, Shimon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the stake.
Great. So yeah, so this was the location. And then the next station, Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. So Holly mentioned, well, who's Veronica? Yeah, no one by the name of Veronica is actually in the Bible. I mean, I don't think. Yeah. So tradition, once again, who knows where these things come from. But tradition assigns the name to the woman who had suffered for 12 years with flow of blood issues until she touched the hem of Christ's garment, and then she herself was healed. That's the person they attribute to Veronica. And so, that story was in Mark, Matthew, and Luke. And so according to the legend, Veronica was present as Jesus passed by on his way to be crucified, and moved by his suffering, she removed her headcloth or handkerchief and then gave it to the Lord to wipe the sweat and blood from his face. And when Jesus handed the cloth back to her, the image of his face remained imprinted on it. And so the fabled cloth became known as the veil of Veronica, and the cloth itself is said to have miraculous curative properties. The legend of Veronica, Saint Veronica in some traditions, is believed to have started in the writings of the early church historian Eusebius of Caesarea. And in Historia Ecclesia, which is church history, Eusebius includes an account of Jesus healing a woman from Caesarea Philippi, if you remember that location. That's where, Peter recognized Jesus as being the Messiah, the Son of God. And so, Jesus healed a woman from Caesarea Philippi who had suffered from a hemorrhage. Hence, what the stories of Mark, Matthew, and Luke have portrayed. And if you follow and read an apocryphal book called the Acts of Pilate, this woman is identified as Veronica. So there is some other stories that kind of lead into this. Later tradition explains that the veil of Veronica was brought to Rome when Emperor Tiberius fell gravely ill with leprosy. And hearing of her miraculous cloth, the emperor summoned Veronica, who carried it to Rome and supposedly used it to cure him. After that, Veronica stayed in Rome, and upon her death bestowed the veil upon Pope Clement. And the veil of Veronica was eventually placed by Pope Urban VIII in an upper chapel of St. Peter's Church, where supposedly it's still held today. So it's one of the church relics. So that's the story of Veronica. But that'll be interesting. If we ever get to apocryphal texts, maybe the Acts of Pilate would be interesting to read.
I haven't read that one.
Yeah.
Have you read it yet?
I have not. Okay. And so from there, then we're moving on to the next station. Jesus falls the second time. And then Jesus meets the daughters of Jerusalem. And so that one actually is in Luke. Luke 23, 27 through 31. Correct.
And the great multitude of the people followed him, and women who also mourned and lamented him. But Jesus turned to them, saying, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For indeed the days are coming in which they will say, Blessed are the barren wombs that never bore, and breasts that never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if they do these things in the green wood, what will be done in the dry?"
Great, thank you. And so that's the 8th station. The 9th one, we actually didn't go to. I'm not exactly sure where the 9th one was, because essentially we're either going from here and then we're kind of making our way through the streets. Well, actually, I mean, that's the way we walked. We kind of made our way through the streets here, and eventually you're going to be exiting the gate to head to Golgotha. But yeah, somewhere in here there was another station that I'm not sure why we didn't stop at that. I think it was a little out of the way. But Jesus followed for the 3rd time. And then we eventually made our way to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And so this is the location where the last 5 stations had taken place. And does anybody know what a sepulcher is? Grave, yeah. So it's a special grave. It's a
More like a tomb, you have a building,
cave. It's a small room or monument cut in rock or built of stone in which a dead person is laid or buried. Yeah. But it's like a special tomb. And so, we'll get to that in just a second. But talking about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, this church was built in the 4th century as the traditional site of the resurrection of Christ. It's been a major Christian pilgrimage destination since it was constructed. And its original Greek name is Church of the Anastas, which means resurrection. Now, control of the church itself is shared by 6 Christian denominations, which is primarily Roman Catholic, Greek Orthodox, and Armenian Apostolic, and to a lesser degree, the Coptic, Syrian, and Ethiopian Orthodox churches. So there's 6 different denominations that will claim this to be home. And as you can imagine, with different entities coming together, there's a lot of, they basically share the space through an uneasy truce and extensive rules and compromises. Because of that, renovations or repairs to the church is almost impossible.
And get the church carpeting.
Oh yes, because everybody's got a say, and everybody's going to, have their opinion on what should be done. But it's interesting because when we were there actually was some renovations taking place. So I guess they did come to some sort of agreement on the upkeep of the place.
Building project started in the 60s.
Yeah, most likely. Now, most famously, there is an ongoing dispute regarding a ladder at one of the upper windows. Thus, the tale of the immovable ladder on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I don't know if you can see from the picture, but here's the ladder. It's a tiny little ladder going up to a window. At some point in the early 18th century, someone placed a ladder up against the side of the church. No one's sure who did it, or more importantly, as to what sect they belonged to. And so, as a result, the ladder remains there to this day, because nobody dares to touch it lest they disturb the status quo.
So is this like just a
I'll move
regular
it.
ladder not attached to the building?
I'm a rebel Baptist. I'll move it.
It's just a ladder.
I'll
Yeah.
cause a holy war.
I don't see the ladder.
Woohoo!
So that's how tedious things can be.
It was the Arabic Essenes.
Yeah, maybe it's just some random person just putting a ladder up there.
Well, you
Maybe
probably
they
put it
wanted
up
to
there and
see
then
the window.
fell. So who was that? It was the painter man.
I just wanted to clean the window so I could see inside. So the location of the ladder is actually thought to be where Jesus' garments were split. And so we'll talk about that.
Up on that ledge.
Well, so the actual foundations have changed over time. But yes, that's the general location. Okay. So we're doing okay on time. All right, so this one, we're going to need 3 readers. We're going to go back to John. The first reader, let's do 17 through 24.
I'll take Mark.
Well, we're going to split up John. Okay, so 17 through 24,
That's me.
25 through 30, and then 31 through 37.
You want me to start?
Sure.
Okay. So they took Jesus away, carrying up the cross by himself. He went to the place called the place of the skull, in Hebrew, Golgotha. There they nailed him to the cross. 2 others were crucified with him, one on either side, with Jesus between them. And Pilate posted a sign on the cross that read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." The place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the site was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, so many people could read it. Then the leading priest objected and said to Pilate, "Change it from the King of the Jews to he said, 'I am the King of the Jews.'" Pilate replied, "No, what I have written, I have written."
2 more verses.
All right. When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they divided his clothes among the 4 of them. They also took his robe, but it was seamless, woven in one piece from the top to the bottom. So they said, "Rather than tearing it apart, let's throw dice for it." This fulfilled the scriptures that said, "They divided my garments among themselves and threw dice for my clothing." It was more like lots than anything else.
Yeah.
That's the 3 dice. That's a lot.
So that is what they did.
Great. So yeah, that was the ladder.
See
Yes.
your Bible now? It's
Uh,
Aramaic, not Hebrew.
Yeah, that's what mine says.
Very few people spoke Hebrew.
Hmm.
In Jesus' day, they spoke Aramaic. Matthew is probably originally written in Aramaic, we believe.
All right, do we have a second reader? 25 through 30.
Nearby Yeshua's execution stake stood his mother's sister Miriam, the wife of Clopas, and Miriam from Magdala. When Yeshua saw his mother and the Talmud whom he loved standing there, he said to his mother, "Mother, this is your son." Then he said to the Talmud, "This is your mother." And from that time on, the Talmud took her into his own home. After this, knowing that all things had accomplished the purpose, Yeshua, in order to fulfill the words of the Tanakh, said, "I'm thirsty." A jar full of cheap sour wine was there, so they soaked the sponge in the wine, coated it with oregano leaves, and held it up to his mouth. After Yeshua had taken the wine, said, "It is accomplished," and letting his head drop, he delivered up the spirit.
Okay, great. And then one more reader. We'll do 31 through 37. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. When Jesus therefore had received the vinegar, he said, "It is finished," and he bowed his head and gave up the ghost. The Jews therefore because it was a preparation that the body should not remain upon the cross on a Sabbath day, for that Sabbath day was a high day, besought Pilate that their legs might be broken, that they might be taken away. Then came the soldiers, and brake the legs of the first, and of the other which was crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus, and saw that he was dead already, they brake not his legs, but one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side, and I got it. Okay. Forthwith came there out blood and water, and he that saw it bare record, and his record is true, and he knoweth that he saith true, that ye might believe. For these things were done, that the scripture should be fulfilled. A bone of him shall not be broken. And again, another scripture saith, they shall look on him whom they pierced.
Thank you. So Roman soldiers broke the legs of the other criminals on the cross, and then when they came to Jesus, they saw he was dead already. And so they broke not his legs, but stabbed him in the side. And so going back to when we started this presentation, talking about the sacrificial lamb, Jesus is basically fulfilling that role. He was the pure lamb, separated from the rest, without blemish, without sin, sacrificed on the cross. Legs were unbroken, but stabbed in the side. And so when he was stabbed, water and blood came out. And so the water resembles the purification, and then the blood represents the redemption. Yeah.
You know what the funny part is that this spear was sought after by so many people for its power, alleged power.
Yeah, there's a lot of legends, that pertain to this whole thing.
Spear of Destiny.
Spear of Destiny. Yeah, there's been several movies about that.
That, I think one of them was Hitler tried to get it as well.
Mhm.
Definitely was trying to get it to win the war.
Yeah, he should have gone after the Veil of Veronica. Why why cause destruction when you can cause so much healing? Yeah. A lot of relics out there, which we'll get to another relic in probably next time. So to finish the thought, so Golgotha was a location just outside the city walls, as was said. And so for the Romans, this location was a place to crucify criminals, to show visitors coming into the city that they don't tolerate crime, in this area. Otherwise, lest this happen to you. For the Jews, crucifixions needed to take place outside the city to keep the city itself clean. And so, we've talked about this several times, but coming into contact with the dead body, meant a period of ritual cleansing for uncleanliness. And, going back to our conversation earlier, the whitewashed tombs, I think it just had to do with just the fact that a lot of the original tombs just really weren't, they were small caves or, holes dug in the ground. And so because there really wasn't a lot of, construction to them, erosion can happen, bones can kind of become available. And so, yeah, if you're a traveler coming through an area, usually it's helpful to have some sort of marking that, that this, is a grave site and that you should be careful to not contaminate yourself. So the idea of whitewashing tombs, you know, was just so that, you know, people can just protect themselves. There's also specific rules when it came to crucifixion, which Romans would have had to follow to keep the peace with the Jews. And so Deuteronomy 21 states that, "And if a man shall have committed a sin worthy of death, and he be put to death, and thou hang him from a tree, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but thou shalt surely bury him that day. For that he is hanged is accursed of God, and thou shalt not defile thy land which thy Lord, thy God, has given thee for an inheritance." And so any body of a Jew that was hanged or crucified then would have had to be taken down before the beginning of the new day, or otherwise there would be defilement, you know, that would be taking place.
Which is why they would have stabbed him to, oh, he's not dead yet, we're running out of time.
Right.
With that, to help speed up the.
Speed up the process. Well, especially considering, you know, they're going into a Sabbath, you know, they got to get their stuff done, you know. Otherwise, you know, because, and the Romans would have had to do it because, well, I mean, yeah, you can't have a Jew touching a dead body and bringing them down and, you know, facilitating those things.
Joseph and Arimathea and Nicodemus did it, right? They were both Jews.
Yeah, so that, well, that's interesting, you know, because that's leading into Passover.
So they started all this on the 9th hour, which would have been noon. And somewhere else it says on the 12th hour, it grew dark right before he gave up the ghost. So that would have been 3 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
So the day starts at 6.
Mm-hmm.
The new day starts. So it's somewhere between 3 and 6. It's not a lot of time.
Yeah.
Because usually if you bury a body, you have to prepare it and anoint it and wrap it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why they came back, because they didn't have time to fully prepare the body.
Mm-hmm.
So they came back to finish the burial preparation.
Although I do wonder how much of that they actually did themselves, or if they could designate or delegate to Romans.
The slaves do it, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, but either way, yeah, not a lot of time. 3 p.m.
Veronica did it.
3 p.m. Yeah, you gotta get the body down.
She got Archie to help her.
You gotta prepare the body, you know, all before sundown. What's up, David?
Do you want me to read Mark 15:33?
Does it pertain to what we're talking about right now?
Well, it pertains to the third hour.
Oh, well, we'll get to that, and I think we'll get to that. Maybe. We'll get to that next time. Okay. All right. It is 11:06. Probably a good time to stop. But yeah, interesting traditions, relics that have come to be. You know, different reasons why people will do things. Yeah. Any further comments on what we talked about today?
The crown of thorns was supposedly in Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. They built that chapel just to house that.
Oh, yeah?
And the chapel's actually in the courtyard of the palace. It's the King of France's personal, well, it would have been England at that time.
And this is rumored to be the crown of thorns?
It's not there anymore.
Oh.
So.
Oh, okay.
But there was, you know, the mounting place for it and everything that we saw.
Oh, okay. I mean, how would that be preserved? That's, I don't know. We'll talk about the cross. The cross is thought to have been found. We'll talk about that next time.
Is it an actual cross or a stake?
That I don't know, because I actually didn't see the cross, you know, and what kind of condition it was in. But, you know, there's a chapel within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that's designated to that area.
So is this church actually on the spot where they believe he was crucified, and you can go in and like look at the ground?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the pictures don't do it justice, I'm sure.
Yeah, a lot of this, I mean, it really doesn't. It's a very vast space. And
It's
so,
really small.
yeah, I wonder if, I'll have to see some of the other pictures. Yeah, so you come in through so this is the doorway. The ladder is on one of the windows up here. So you're walking in here. And then the actual hill on which he died, you come in, there's a stairwell that goes up, and that leads to all this stuff, which very heavily influenced by the Greek Orthodox, as you can tell. A lot of gold, a lot of silver, a lot of candles. Yes.
You didn't see the cross. Could the cross be in the museum?
Maybe. To be honest, I don't know where it is.
That's an interesting question.
It's right next to the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah. But yeah, this is a big area. This is the area thought that, the actual hill was. So that's where he was crucified.
Good question.
And then as you keep going, then you get into a larger area on the other side, which is where the tomb is thought to be. And so this is the tomb, which,
So this
Click.
is the building?
this is all the same building. It's a very large building.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Look at that crowd.
I just didn't imagine that, like, that's pretty handy, like, if Joseph's tomb was, like, just right down the hill from the
Yeah.
crucifixion site. Okay, good.
Yeah. Well, they probably didn't require a lot of space, which we'll also talk about, what the actual tomb likely looked like.
Right there on the side of the road.
Yeah, that's usually what a lot of the tombs looked like early on. Which in my mind, you hear the story about, the big boulder, rolled over the entrance. And then, this is a new tomb that was uncovered. And it's like, oh yeah, maybe it's not as big as I thought. But
We don't have a lot of real estate to play with. So.
that's true. Okay. So we'll get to all this, next time. A little teaser. Would somebody open us up in prayer?
I will.
Justin? Sure.
Dear Heavenly Lord, dear Heavenly Dear Father, thank you for bringing us here today. Thank you for allowing us to be, thanks for everything you've given us and done for us. Please help us and please love us. Be focused and mindful with the teacher is saying. And please know the daily life we go about our day, doing whatever it is that we do, remembering who you are, and what you stand for, who we are, and what we need to do to better improve our life and our walk with you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Great. Thanks.